Good morning, everybody. The Wright brothers did their flight in the early 1900s, and by the time the 1920s rolled around, people were really getting more and more interested in airplanes. And it was on this date, May 21 in 1927, that the great event of flying across the Atlantic successfully alone was finished by Charles Lindbergh. World War I ended in 1918, so people were real happy about that, but there was quite a bit of uncertainty as to what the future held. For instance, in Russia in 1917, Lenin and the Bolsheviks had taken over, so what was going to happen with communism in Europe and in North America? 1922, T.S. Eliot wrote The Wasteland, and this captured the sense of uneasiness and uncertainty that gripped the world after World War I. 1920, there was a bombing on Wall Street, and this was associated with anarchists. So all through that time period, you have what's known as the Red Scare and this real fear of revolutionary activity in our country. And one result of that was in 1924 was the Immigration Act that really limited immigrants from certain part of the world. And that's part of that fear of perhaps revolutionaries coming to the country. 1919, the Eighth Amendment had been passed by the Congress and the country, and that made most alcohol illegal, which opened the door for people like Al Capone, pictured here, and organized crime. So that was a real gift to the mobsters, was that prohibition. Dayton, Tennessee was the Scopes trial in 1925. The conservative Christians against what they considered worldly America. So culture clashes were going on in the 1920s. Women had got the vote in 1920, so we see here some flappers. So women were pushing the envelope, according to some, to try to get more individuality and more rights because they could vote. So here's the Wright brothers. They did their flight in 1903, and all through the teens and the 20s, airplanes made a lot of advancements. And it was not uncommon in the 1920s to see barnstormers, people doing stunts on airplanes. And many of these pilots had flown during World War I. So people are more and more familiar with airplanes, and it was in 1920 that the first airmail happened between New York and California. So here's another example of airplanes being more and more important. So this is the context of our event. May 21, 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic by himself. This really captured the imagination of the world, and check YouTube out for newsreels of this. It's really something. The Model T, pictured here, came out in 1908, and it also had all kinds of advances. Cars were used a lot in World War I, for example. So by the time we get to the 1920s, more and more people own cars, and you see gas stations sprouting up all over the place like this one pictured here. And eventually the federal government got involved, and here's a map of the U.S. highway system that was laid out during this time period. So not the interstates yet. Those come after World War II, but perhaps you have a U.S. highway near your house, and it came from that time period. And one result of everybody moving around by cars was the movie industry moved from the East Coast out to California, partly because the weather was a lot better for shooting movies. Another example of how the nation became more homogeneous was by the radio. As people tuned in, they could get a sense of what other people were doing in other parts of the country. And one thing people were doing in the 1920s was buying stock. Folks who would never go to the casino were buying stock based on advice of a friend. There was a frenzy of stock buying all through the 20s. And October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. People lost a lot of their wealth, and welcome to the 1930s and the decade of the Great Depression.